After Mao had come to power in the 1940s, China became an undoubtedly communist nation. The Red Guard made sure that everyone read Mao's Little Red Book and abided by communist ideals. Propaganda was present everywhere in an attempt to make men, women, and children live their lives according to Maoism. Anyone who went against this was persecuted in an attempt to make all citizens equal. Intellectuals were criticized in public and humiliated because Mao believed they were a threat to the state. Many people, including doctors, lawyers, scientists, and teachers, were jailed, threatened, executed, and deprived of their rights. Religious objects were destroyed while large groups of Christians, Buddhists, and Muslims were persecuted. Places of worship were demolished, and anyone who believed in a power greater than Mao was treated cruelly. Women were given greater legal rights, but were culturally treated as insignificant and considered inferior. They were paid lower wages and continually endured spousal abuse. Before Mao, religion was a visually apparent aspect of Chinese culture. There were tens of millions of people who practiced various religions, including Christianity, Buddhism, and Islam. However, when Mao came to power, religious symbols were destroyed. Mao wanted the people of China to focus all of their attention on the nation and not on any god or religious practice.
During the time of Mao, he tried to get rid of all of us. He didn't want any of us congregating. He thought Christianity was a threat to communism. Our churches were destroyed and statues were demolished. The Red Guards even got normal citizens to help them in destroying statues of great figures like the Virgin Mary. Mao wanted us to worship him, so he replaced religious symbols with pictures of himself. He tried to rid the country of religious influence so much that an underground Christian community was formed. Before Mao came to power, Buddhism was thriving in Tibet and in other areas of China. After Mao came to power, he invaded Tibet and took control over the whole area. Our rights were taken away and we weren't free to practice Buddhism. All monks around China were oppressed as well. The Dalai Lama was even forced to flee the country because he was being persecuted. Our monasteries were destroyed and religious objects were smashed because Mao didn't approve of our way of life and wanted us to follow only Maoism. He saw Buddhism as a threat. Mao saw religion as being part of the old culture, so he tried to get rid of all traces of it when he tried to change the four oaths. We tried to be peaceful with them because part of our culture is to be peaceful and understanding, but Mao and the Red Guard didn't understand and still ruined our way of life. It was awful to watch our monasteries and statues being carried out as if they didn't matter. These things didn't mean anything to Mao, but meant so much to us. We lived our lives according to Buddhism, and when Mao came in, he completely destroyed our way of life. We aren't a threatening people, so we did not understand why we were being attacked. Today, China still has control over Tibet. Tibet isn't a free nation. The Dalai Lama is still in exile in India because Tibet is now an unwelcoming place. Although Buddhists didn't speak out loudly against Mao, he didn't allow us to live as we wanted because Mao wanted everyone to live the same way and to live the way he wanted us to live.
Along with people of all religions, intellectuals were widely criticized. They were seen as a threat to the communist state of China because they were the ones who spoke out against Mao's regime. Mao was afraid they would create too much dissent, so he had them taken from their work and homes to publicly humiliate them in front of large crowds. Their names were crossed out to dehumanize them and label them as criminals. These public humiliations served to warn the people of China against acting as these intellectuals had and rebelling against the government. Mao saw intellectuals as a threat to himself and the communist state of China.
I was a doctor in China during this time. I was exiled to the countryside. My family was taken from me. My career was taken from me. My livelihood and dignity were taken from me in a matter of hours. I will never forget the humiliation the communists caused me. I was prevented from taking care of my family. Basic rights were stripped from me. Just because I was considered an intellectual, I was seen as a threat. Being classified as an intellectual made me scrutinized and oppressed. I could no longer go to school and receive a great education. I was exiled to the countryside along with any other members of the intellectual and academic community. Before I went to the countryside, I remember being beaten and publicly ridiculed in the streets. I'd heard of people being humiliated in huge stadiums too. I stood with the other academically oriented people while we were screamed at, united under the idea that the communists were unjust. Other people, my own Chinese brothers and sisters, yelled at me and physically assaulted me and other individuals. I couldn't believe I was being attacked for having an education. I was ridiculed for being a doctor before I was taken from my home. There were some women in my group too, and they were treated even worse. As much as the Red Guard and other citizens didn't respect me, they really didn't have any respect for the women next to me. China was a very paternalistic society at that time, and women were seen as inferior. So women who spoke out against the government were more harassed than men were. They were slapped, screamed at, and beaten with greater ferocity.
I remember when Chairman Mao first came into power. He said he'd revolutionize the way females were viewed in my country. He argued for equal rights. In Mao's New World, he saw men and women as having the same worth. As long as we were mentally and physically capable, we were met with equality. Sadly, this didn't translate into the real world. Well, if we violated basic laws, well, you see, I knew of a woman from my village who was convicted of rebelling against Mao's regime. She lost her husband, her home, her children, and her dignity. In other situations, because we were legally equally as free as men, we were saddled with the same laws and restrictions. The new equality laws made women subject to new discrimination since they were able to enter the workforce. Women were still not seen as equals, and it was socially acceptable to give us longer work hours and pay us lower wages. China needed workers because Mao was trying to revitalize the economy with a great leap forward. Also, many bosses harassed us in the workplace. Since we were seen as inferior, no one listened to us and nothing was done to improve our working or living conditions. Overall, under Mao's rule, women were still culturally oppressed. Mao only had us look equal on paper because in communism, everyone is supposed to be equal. He always worked to make communism the law of the land. That's why he oppressed intellectuals and people of faith. It was in the interest of the communist regime. That's why he allowed women to look like equals, because that's the way it was supposed to be in communism. However, in reality, Mao oppressed the people of his country so they wouldn't threaten his power.